Welcome to the Draft Deeper podcast. This is your host, Nathan Grubel. Joining me, as always, is my producer, Kevin Black. And also joining me tonight, I can't talk about the Detroit Pistons with anybody else other than, you know him, Bryce Simon, Motor City Hoops. I also am joined by his co-host over at the Pistons Pulse podcast. You would know him as Detroit Pistons beat writer for the Free Press, Omari Sankofa. First time on the Draft Deeper podcast. I get both of these guys tonight to talk Pistons hoops. Omari, I'll start with you. What's going on, man?
It's going good, man. It's peak offseason right now, so I feel like this is the best time of the year to not only take some time off. I've been semi-off for like the last 2 weeks, but also just all of the speculative season talk and whatnot that I know fans are craving right now, so it should be a fun episode.
There's no better time to kind of sit back, react to what we saw in Summer League, talk about some of the highlights from the draft, because I'm not doing any podcasts yet about the 2023 NBA draft. So a little too early for some 23 draft pods. So I'm relaxing. I'm taking some time away, and I've been reviewing some of what I feel are some of the best fits from where we were at as far as the 2022 NBA draft. Bryce, I know you're excited for what the Pistons did in the draft. I know you are incredibly pumped to talk with me tonight and give some of your thoughts. What's going on with you? How you doing tonight?
I'm good. I like the Pistons draft. The offseason, maybe Nathan was a little different in general than what we thought with the Pistons. I know there was, some thoughts maybe they'd go big name hunting and none of that happened. But I think there's a lot of upside with the roster right now. It's young. It's exciting. It's going to be fun. I don't know if it'll turn into a lot of wins, but it's going to be fun to watch.
I would agree 100%. I think the Pistons are one of these top young teams that are primed to have certainly maybe not a ton of wins, but they're going to have a lot of fun during the regular season. They're going to be an enjoyable team to watch. We have Cade Cunningham going into year 2. We have another year of Sadiq Bey showing improvements to his game. We get all the fun youngsters that they just drafted. We still need to see what we're going to get from Killian Hayes, the Marvin Bagley reclamation project. Bryce, you and I talked about the last time we were on this podcast. There are a number of storylines that you guys at least get to talk about throughout the season, right? That would interest somebody like me, someone who watches these young guys come in and develop. So let's start out with the 5th overall pick in the 2022 NBA draft. There's no other place we can start. Jaden Ivey. We didn't know it was going to be Jaden Ivey to the Detroit Pistons. There was talk of the Kings could have went a number of different directions. I thought if you would have asked people like myself, for example, who evaluate these prospects all year long and going off of our big boards and what we would project on a mock draft, I would have told the Kings just take Jaden Ivey, take the best player available, worry about fit, we'll figure everything else out later. They went Keegan Murray. I didn't dislike that they went with Keegan Murray. I was a big Keegan Murray fan. I think all of us at No Ceilings, I'll shout out Tyler Rucker, who's probably the biggest Keegan Murray fan out of all of us, but I felt like the pick was justified because they did go for fit, but I think you can also make an upside argument. And now I think that argument is a lot clearer after what we saw in Summer League. Keegan Murray was one of the best players out in Vegas, but they went that direction, which meant Jaden Ivey fell to the 5th pick to the Detroit Pistons. And Bryce, I'll start with you. I know that you were, I think you were big on Ivey before the draft, and you were really happy with how you evaluated him, and you and I even had some texts back and forth. So now that you got to watch that play out, what was your reaction on draft night when the Pistons were actually able to bring in Ivey?
Well, first, I just want to say Omari was a huge fan of Keegan Murray as well. If we have any listeners of the Pistons Pulse listening to this episode, they know they've heard me and Omari go back and forth and round about Keegan Murray. So I don't know that he had Jaden Ivey higher than Keegan Murray. Omari, probably not still, but you were a big fan of Keegan.
I was a big fan of Keegan because he's just a guy that can play. And I think a lot of drafts, you look back and guys like Keegan end up, I think, going a bit higher just because you look at players like Desmond Bane. Everybody talks about the age, and then it's like, oh, like this guy can handle the ball a little bit, and he can shoot, and he does everything you want in a modern guard. And Keegan does all the stuff you want in a modern forward. And like I'll get to arguments for upside, but I just think Keegan being a late bloomer, as well as he shot, being good inside, it was just tough for me to see how he would fail. So whether it's upside or floor or whatever, I just thought Keegan deserved to be a top 5 pick.
Yeah, but what with Jaden Ivey, we obviously talked a lot about him as well. I was high on him. Nathan, you and probably know this. I was high on Benedict Mathurin, but I still said that I would take Jaden Ivey ahead of Benedict Mathurin, even though I thought Benedict was a little bit more of a smoother fit next to Cade Cunningham. That's probably the biggest thing that's been talked about was how do Cade and Jaden Ivey play together? And I've tried to talk to any Pistons fans that have asked me and tell them that Jaden doesn't always have to have the ball in his hands. He has played off ball at Purdue. He hasn't necessarily been the point guard. I know a lot is in pick and roll and isolation. I get it. I know in transition he gets the ball, but you watch a Purdue game, you see him running off screens and staggers and all of those things. And we saw it the first play of Summer League, Nathan. They set a pin down, he caught, he curled into the lane and threw the lob to the big man that we'll talk about later.
Yeah, we will definitely talk about Mr. Jalen Duren a little bit later on. What about you, Omari? What were your initial thoughts when Jaden Ivey actually went and was the pick at number 5 to the Pistons? It sounds like he might have been just a tad disappointed. You might have wanted them to go a different direction if the other guy was there, but what were your initial reactions?
Yeah, I mean, I really didn't have any preference. I just covered the team. I don't really have any. I wouldn't say I was rooting for an outcome. I think I probably had question marks personally for Ivy as far as how that game overall translates. I think the athleticism is unquestioned, but shooting didn't shoot well as a freshman. Shot well first half of the sophomore year, and then it kind of fell off. Playmaking solid for lead guard, not great. But honestly, I didn't think he would be there when the Pistons were selecting. There was some noise about OKC being really high on him, him being to play higher than the top 4. And then just from a draft the best player, not the best fit standpoint, for me, it was tough to see Sacramento passing on him, even though I think there were obvious fit concerns with him and De'Aaron Fox, who are both down here players, both need the ball in their hands. And just from a fit standpoint, that probably doesn't put Ivy in the best position to succeed. So when it happened, I think for me, it was a genuine question mark of, okay, do the Pistons go ahead and take Ivy, who is the most valuable player here? Just from talking to people, you know that they were pretty high on Keegan. They were also high on Mathurin, who of course ended up going a pick later to the Pacers. So it was very much a which direction do the Pistons go? But of course, Ivy had big fans in the front office when they drafted him and had his press conference later on that next week. They gave him jerseys of his dad, who played for Detroit Country Day here as a football player, and then his mom, and was actually born here because his dad played for the Lions, Jaden's grandfather, that is, and then his mom played for the Detroit Shock. So overall, it ended up being a really good situation, I think, for everyone. But in this draft, that was just so different from last year, where I think Cade was the obvious pick. I just don't know if Ivy was the obvious pick for everybody who was making that decision, just because there were some question marks about how he fit with Cade. But just drafted for upside, when you're the Pistons, haven't won a playoff game since 2008. I think that's probably the most logical thing to do.
You actually just touched on, before I kick it back to Bryce to talk more about the fit, particularly in the backcourt, Omari, you actually touched on something interesting, in that he might not have been the obvious pick through the process for the Pistons, but now that the pick was made, I mean, you've heard Ivy in all the interviews, how emotional he was on draft night, how he's really embraced wanting to play for Detroit, right? Play for the city of Detroit and really represent the Pistons in a strong and meaningful way. You saw the same thing with Cade Cunningham last year when he was drafted. He wanted to be there. He truly wants to be in Detroit. And you're getting the same vibe from Jane. So now, Omari, what's been the city's reaction to an extent to now have not only one guy who they made with a top pick, who they know really wants to embrace the city, but now you've done it again, a second time in the top 5. It seems like the Pistons are really building something special from a culture perspective, not even just everything going on the floor.
No doubt. I think fans recognize that. I mean, for Cade on draft night, you're the number 1 pick, almost consensus best prospect in the draft, and you put on buffs on draft night. Like, I think that, not that he needed to be sold to the franchise, but that kind of took it to an entirely different level. And I know Bryce will agree, but I think Jaden Ivey was by far the player that most Pistons fans wanted at number 5, not just from a talent standpoint, but I think those Detroit ties tied into that as well. So yeah, back-to-back drafts, number 1 pick puts on buffs, and then the 5th overall pick cries because he's so happy. That's I mean, I would say that's probably the best case scenario, just from a fans are going to root for you standpoint. And that doesn't happen too often, too, to have a player who has ties to the city. Detroit's produced a lot of basketball talent, but how many of those players have played for the Pistons, especially that high. That's pretty unique. So best case scenario for sure. Like, I don't think you could ever predict that 2 top 5 picks the back-to-back years will do so much to endear themselves to the fan base.
I think it's absolutely awesome to watch, especially from where I'm sitting, that I'm not following the NBA game as heavily as obviously I am everything on the scouting side, but just watching from a player developmental perspective, it's really fun to see all these young players come together and truly enjoy playing with one another. Just those quote unquote immaculate vibes, as everybody on social media likes to say nowadays, a little buzz phrase, but just the vibes that can come from all of those guys loving, truly, genuinely wanting to be in the building and meshing with one another. I think that's really fun to see. And a lot of young teams in the NBA feel like that's the direction that they're going. The Pistons obviously being one of those. Bryce, I know you have plenty of words to say about Jaden Ivey's fit with the Detroit Pistons. I know you guys have been talking about it. I know you've gone in length on different platforms, but you're on the Draft Deeper podcast, so you got to give my audience your 2 cents on how you think Jaden Ivey will not only fit with the team, but really, what do you think his development's going to look like? Because it's one thing if Cade and Jaden are the starting backcourt, and maybe they're also closing games in the backcourt, but I think there's going to be plenty of opportunity for them to sort of play apart from one another. And I think that's really where Jaden Ivey's on-ball reps, in my opinion, I would think that's where more of them come from, is when Cade's off the floor, Jaden can exclusively have the ball in his hands. They can have him play the primary point, give him more of those developmental reps with some of the second unit guys, maybe staggering against some of the starters. How do you really see a lot of this playing out on the court?
Yeah, first I want to say everything Omari talked about with the fan base is true, and it's huge, Nathan, because Detroit really has this Detroit versus everybody mentality, and they feel like they're not respected a lot, the fan base. And like, you know, you always have other fan bases saying, hey, you know, nobody wants to come play for you. Nobody wants to get, you know, drafted by Detroit. So to have guys that have done what Cade and Ivey have done the last couple of years is really exciting. Getting to on the floor, one, just some developmental things with Jaden Ivey. Nathan, you know these things, and maybe your listeners do as well. The 3-point shooting has to continue to develop and get better. But I think the biggest thing for him, I actually think he's a fine passer. A lot of people question his passing. I think he gets into the lane and makes fine reads, not like high level reads, but he's so explosive with his first step. I think he's got to finish better in the mid range. If I had one improvement that I could give Jaden Ivey, it would actually either be that mid range pull up or the little floater, something in that, you know, 6 to 12, 6 to 15 foot range, where I think he really needs to develop. And then on the defensive end also, what's interesting about what you're talking about, Nathan, is the draft before Cade Cunningham, the Detroit Pistons with the number 7 selection took Killian Hayes. So if you want to stagger Cade, that sounds perfect, right? Let's stagger those minutes with Cade. Let's give Jaden Ivey the ball. Well, now when does Killian Hayes get the ball in his hands? And I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later when we do our rankings.
I knew someone was going to talk about it. I was trying to keep this podcast really positive for everybody listening out there, but we got to talk about it at some point.
Hey, I'll tell you this. I don't know that you'll get two podcasters that will shoot you straight more than Omari and I. Like, we're positive. We enjoy covering and talking about the team. Me more from a fan perspective. Obviously, it's Omari's job, but we're going to criticize if we think Jaden Ivey doesn't do something well. I texted you the other day, Nathan. What did I tell you about Cade Cunningham's defense after listening to one of your episodes? You know, I was like, man, I think you guys are giving Cade too much credit for his defense right now. So we're going to tell it to you straight. And Killian Hayes, it's a huge year for that young man.
It is. And Omari, I guess we might as well, before we get into the big man and some of your thoughts about the trade that happened to get Jalen Duren to Detroit, we might as well rip the Band-Aid off of Killian Hayes, right? We might as well just rip it off. So just from some of what you're hearing this offseason, kind of the work that Killian Hayes is putting in, coming into his 3rd year now in the NBA, what are some of the things that you're hearing, and what are some of your hopes and expectations for Killian to really have a quote unquote bounce back year, to really get himself back on that upward trajectory in the public's eyes at the very least?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's breaking news to say that everybody wants to see more from him. When you are 7th overall pick, you come in with certain expectations, and it's not entirely his fault that he got hurt his rookie year and he came in during COVID, and there's some things that are outside of his control. At the same time, I think it's also just a fact that it's really hard for point guards who don't score the ball to stick in the NBA. You have to be not only a top tier defender, but really embrace the intangibles, whether it's from a leadership standpoint, like Marcus Smart, or you just have to bring more to the table than what Killian's done. And I think you see the flashes as far as him being a passer, and especially as a defender. The guy was probably Detroit's best overall perimeter defender last season. So there's some NBA talent there, but the bottom line is that he doesn't finish at the rim very well. He doesn't shoot very well, and he's a reluctant shooter. And you have to bring something from a scoring standpoint to stick, and he hasn't done that yet. And that's tough. I think it's also tough that the franchise really just through pure luck ended up with Cade Cunningham. But not pure luck, that's the second best odds in 2021. So, I would say pure luck. But the bottom line is that you add Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey back-to-back years, and they're both on-ball guys. And now Killian, who hasn't really established himself, is also, competing with two other young guys who are probably higher upside long-term for minutes. So that puts extra pressure on him to deliver. I think the reality for Killian is that probably what he has to improve on to get to the point where he is a rotation player very solidly probably isn't a lot, but he has to get better at shooting. You can't be a sub 30% shooter. Ideally, you're probably at the very least 34% to be able to thrive next to Cade or next to Ivy, especially next to Ivy. Like, I'm curious to see how he and Killian fit next to each other next season, given that, whose hands do you want the ball in, right? Killian's a better defender. He's a better passer. Not that those guys shoot super well. Like, I don't know if Ivy's going to shoot 35%, 28. Like, honestly, don't know. I mean, I talked about the shooting earlier. There's a lot to figure out, but I think long term, Cade's Cade, right? And Ivy's probably the guy who gets a bit of the doubt now, given that he's a rookie. So Killian's got to show more. Bottom line, he's got to show more. He'll be extension eligible in a year, and he's got to be in a place where the team could say, okay, we feel good about extending him at whatever price they feel he's worth.
I agree with you, Omari. It's really interesting to think about fits between the three of those guys, right? So I agree with you 100%. Cade's Cade, right? He's the franchise guy. He's going to be there. The Ivy and Killian Hayes debate is intriguing. And I think from surface level, we'd be very quick to say it's Ivy. He was just the 5th overall pick. We want to see what he can do. Offensively, I think he can just do things that Killian can't do. I do buy the spot up shooting. I buy the off ball cutting. He's just so much of a more dynamic player, especially in the open court, when the Pistons are probably going to want to play into more of an up and down game. I think they were 14th in pace last year. I think that number sounds right when I was looking over some stats earlier, but they're going to want to get a little bit more up and down, especially with Ivy in the fold. Killian doesn't bring those same things to the table offensively, but as Omari was just talking about, Bryce, the defense, I think, is potentially light years ahead of where Jaden Ivey is going to be coming into his rookie season. So they both bring different things to the table. What are your thoughts on Killian Hayes and Jaden Ivey and kind of how you think the three guards can, quote unquote, coexist in the backcourt?
Like, whenever I try to be practical. Like, Troy Weaver couldn't have selected 7 rotation guys in the last 3 drafts, right? He could, that doesn't seem realistic to me, but I get excited. I think that 3-guard rotation could work if the shooting comes around. None of those guys, even Cade Cunningham only shot 31% from 3 last season. So none of those guys are just knocked down off-ball players and off-ball shooters. So if the shooting came around for 1 or 2 or up a little bit for all 3, I do think that there's a little rotation where you can make it work. And I actually think you can play all 3 together, because I think eventually Cade Cunningham can scale down and guard threes if he needed to. What Killian has to do is get more confident, man. Like, offensively, it comes and goes, and it has been tough for him. He comes in as the number 7 pick. He's starting. He has Blake Griffin on his team. He has Derrick Rose on his team. He's deferring to them. Then he gets injured. Then he comes back for his sophomore season, and Cade Cunningham is now undoubtedly the face of the franchise. Plus, there was Jeremy Grant in the fold at the time. So I think he's been a little lost, Nathan, with what his role is. But now I think he knows. He's had a whole offseason knowing what his role is and what he needs to do well to provide value to this team. And he definitely brings it on the defensive end. I think, as Omari said, I don't think it's a question who the best perimeter defender on this Pistons team is. It's Killian Hayes.
Omari's answer was perfect in a number of ways. And if anybody, while they're listening to this podcast, needs to rewind just a few seconds and re-listen to everything that he said, he dropped all the nuggets in there. And the most important thing about Killian Bryce, you just touched on it, and Omari touched on it as well, was the confidence, particularly finishing around the basket. And I think that plays more into the perimeter game because he settles so often for these really poor pull-up jump shots. So, Bryce, how do you think he can improve his finishing around the basket to maybe get more of that confidence to where he's settling less for those perimeter looks? Is it just the spacing needs to be better overall from a team perspective? Is it how he attacks? Is it the angles he takes? Is it anything finishing between either hand? Like what are the biggest things that you're looking for him to improve on in that area?
Well, and I will say, I don't know if we'll get to it in totality, but shooting is an issue with this team. Omari and I think will both, say that it's a major issue with this team, depending on development from some players like Isaiah Stewart, Killian Hayes, those type of guys. How many minutes of, I'm so sorry, some other guys get.
Don't tease me. They were teasing me hardcore during summer league with Isaiah Stewart playing that Kevin Love type role. Don't tease me like that, Detroit. I know they were just testing it out. But
If we talk about Isaiah Stewart, that's all we're going to talk. It's real, Nathan. It is real. Omari, tell him it's real.
Yeah, it's real. And not to spoil later segments, but we are going to dish out some Isaiah Stewart love.
Yes, I love it.
So get ready.
I love it.
But I think he has it in him, Nathan. I can go break down film and find you clips where he creates an isolation. He doesn't even have to have a ball screen. Now, yes, he's very left-hand dominant. He doesn't go to his right as well as his left, but it just seems like lefties find a way, even though like lefties just find a way. I think he drives to pass, Nathan, instead of drives to score. I truly believe that. In his mind, he is driving to pass the ball. And then when the pass isn't there, he either turns it over or he's like, oh my gosh, now I have to shoot. And then he's not prepared to shoot it and he misses. I truly believe that. I think it's a change in mentality for Killian Hayes, not necessarily a huge change in skill level.
So we gotta flip to the big men, and Isaiah Stewart will be part of this in just a little bit. But Omari, since this is your job, you're the reporter here, I have to ask you on a scale of 1 to 10, how effing crazy was that Jalen Duren trade to follow on draft night? Because like us at No Ceilings, we're trying to do a live draft show, and there's all these different transactions going on. I'm like, screw it, I can't even keep up anymore. Like, I'm just gonna let the dust settle, and eventually, like, we'll talk about it when enough of the dust settles. But like when you're doing a reporting job like that, and there are just calls being made left and right, and how crazy is it to actually try and report on something live like that, like when it's going on?
Yeah, I mean, you're just on your phone nonstop on draft night, trying to stay on top of everything. And it was like, if I'm just recounting the night in my head, it's like, okay, Ivy falls to 5. So you're, texting people like, is Ivy the pick, this and that. And then, you're hearing word that they may not be done. Well, for one, it was like, well, are they going to trade Ivy? Because it seemed like
the Knicks wanted him.
Yeah, and it seemed like there's a slim possibility after that. It could happen. Just because the phones are ringing and you kind of have to listen to see what's out there. And then after a certain point in the night, the Pistons realized that, well, one, I would say that Jalen Duren was very high on the draft board, and I do think that there was some consideration for him with the 5th pick.
Okay.
And then 2, I would say there's a point in the night where the Pistons realized they could acquire Duren without giving Ivy up. And I don't know if they were aware that when they traded Jeremy Grant for, cap and a distant first and whatnot, that was going to be the end result. But when it happened on draft night, they were obviously very thrilled, because I think everybody in that draft room left incredibly happy, just because Troy Weaver had wanted a Jalen Duren type player basically since he was hired as GM. Just him being extremely athletic. Just the upside he has on defense, the upside he has on offense. Troy Weaver had wanted a player like that for a while, and he finally got him. So from a craziness standpoint, I'd probably say just like an 8.5, because Troy Weaver has, like everybody know, like fans call him Trader Troy. Like, he's going to make trades. Everybody expects that. He made like a dozen trades, it seems like, after when he took over in 2020. And of course, the Pistons entered that 2020 draft with 1 first-round pick, enough of 3. So there was already a precedent for that. But for Ivy and Duren, I think specifically being 2 of the best athletes in the draft and not the 2 best. And just raises the block potential of this team so much. Yeah, I think 8.5 feels right. Like, I don't know if anybody expected they would leave with 2 lottery picks, but they put it off and gave basically nothing up to do it.
And that was an important nugget to take away as well, is when we talk about raising the athletic floor of this team, right? Like Cade Cunningham is Cade Cunningham for a reason, but he's not a super athlete, Bryce.
Cade called himself slow the last time at Summer League. I got a chance to just tag along with Omari as a credentialed media member. We got to go watch practice, and I was too scared to ask questions, but Omari's asking questions, and as the other beat reporters are, and Cade essentially goes, yeah, I mean, Jaden Ivey's really fast. I'm not fast. I'm slow. So Cade knows, he understands it.
But like being able to build that dynamic around Cade, and this is, listen, I've done the Thunder podcast now, I've done the Rockets podcast now. Like the common theme of what I thought was fascinating about this draft in particular is you see these general managers committing to the young core that's already in place. They all want to see what they have from these guys, right? Like, we're going into this year, it's a very clean bill evaluation year. Like, we're going to see what we have with all these guys. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to try to put complementary talent around them to really bring out the best of them and see where are we going to be at after this season, right? Like once this season's over, then we can talk about who's best long-term fit wise, who might we need to move off of, what kind of talent do we need to bring in to make some of these other guys better. I like that these executives are giving these young cores a chance to thrive like that. I really feel like with Ivey and Duren, that's exactly what they're doing in Detroit. And I absolutely love it. So, Bryce, talk about your thoughts on Jalen Duren. How excited were you when that trade was pulled off? And what do you think he's going to bring to the table in Detroit?
Well, I was the same way as you, Nathan. I was like, what is going on? I can't figure out whose picks are going where. I still don't know that I know who has the Pistons pick, that, you know, the Bucks one they got from the Blazers and the one they used to owe Oklahoma City and all this stuff. It's craziness, but I was excited. And then throughout the weeks that followed, to hear, Omari dropped it a little bit ago, to hear that Troy Weaver seriously liked Duren at number 5. Can you imagine what Troy Weaver felt when he got Jalen Duren at number 13? I bet Troy Weaver and his front office felt like they struck gold with that pick. I'm super high on Jalen Duren. I said this the other day, Nathan, and Omari and I may differ on this a little bit. I think Omari sees more immediate ability from Jalen Duren than I do. I think I'm lower on Jalen Duren rookie year impact than most, but I'm higher on his long-term ceiling than most. I think Jalen Duren is big time, or has the chance to be big time, as more than just a lob threat rim runner guy. I think he has an offensive skill set that if it develops, he can short roll pass, he can DHO, he can do a lot of really nice things. And I'm excited to see that develop.
So that's exactly what he's going to be. He's going to be a roll man. He's going to be a lob threat, play finisher. But I guess my counter to that, Bryce, which is where I might agree with Omari in that he could have more immediate impact than we might foresee, is if Cade is the truly special passer that everybody's been touting him as for years coming in. And you and I did talk on our last podcast that we did together about Cade's passing and how there are some things he needs to work on. There's talent, but there are some things he needs to work on. If he is that guy, if Jaden Ivey is as good of a passer as you think he is, if Killian Hayes can continue to be a good passer in the NBA, those opportunities are going to be there for Duren on the lobs, on some of those easy finishes. So offensively, he could actually have a significant impact. Now, defensively, we think he's going to be good in his career defensively, but with all rookies, especially big men, it's just going to take a little bit of time. So I think in that regard, I might see him coming along a little bit slower, but in terms of just getting on the floor and contributing easy points and rebounds, I do think he's going to be able to do that in his rookie year.
So the reason I say not as much of an impact, one, I do think he's raw even in that lob threat, because at Memphis, you know this, Nathan, he wasn't working with a whole lot in terms of pick and roll because of the guards that they had. The other thing is, I think Marvin Bagley III is going to get the first chance with this Detroit Pistons team. I actually think Marvin Bagley III starts opening night for the Detroit Pistons. And then you also have Nerlens Noel. Are they going to play him? So the Pistons are in a unique situation where, yes, they have all these young guys you want to give opportunities, but they have 3 or 4 veterans as well that you're like, I don't know that Dwayne Casey and Troy Weaver are just going to stick those guys on the bench and never play them. And Nerlens Noel, Alec Burke needs to play anyway because of the shooting. Corey Joseph, Kelly Olynyk. I know Kelly Olynyk's not the same type of big, but I'm not sure the minutes at the big spot at the 4 or the 5 are necessarily going to be there immediately to start the season.
I agree with that 100%. And speaking of bigs, Omari, I'll go to you first. You guys are both going to get to stand up here and shout to the rafters for your boy Isaiah Stewart, because I'm an Isaiah Stewart fan too, and I was before the draft, and seeing him during his first years in the league, like I believe in him as a legitimate starting big man. But what was interesting in summer league is you talked about how Troy Weaver was very high on Duren coming into the draft. We saw him start at center. And then we saw Isaiah Stewart starting next to him in this Kevin Love, big-bodied 4, I'm going to space the floor for everybody else style role. And I freaking loved it because I bought into the jump shot before the draft with Isaiah Stewart. Now we saw him shoot the lights out of the ball in summer league. Obviously, it's summer league. It's a small sample, blah, blah, blah. But I think he is ready for a potential stretch big role like that. There are some people who would disagree with me, but it sounds like you two want to bring some positivity to the situation. What's kind of the feeling around the organization with where Isaiah Stewart's future is, Omari?
Yeah. So when Isaiah Stewart was drafted, there was 2 things that Troy kind of said early on that I think have come into fruition 3 years later, or 2 years later, however long it's been. 3 years. It's going into year 3. Okay.
Omari never knows what Nathan, you don't know what it's like working with Omari. He never knows what day it is. He never knows what month it is. He never knows what year it is. Like he never knows.
COVID really screwed up my perception of time. But he's going into year 3. So one was that he had good feet. He said he moved his feet probably a lot better than he showed at Washington. And what they play in the zone. So obviously that's, a very different defensive role than how big is going to play in the NBA, where you're playing zone a lot more sporadically and probably to less success. 2, that he shot the ball a lot better behind the scenes and he was able to show in college, and that they believe in his touch, they believe in his form, and saw his upside there. I think Isaiah Stewart's a unique big man in the sense that he's played most of his minutes at center. Offensively, there hasn't really been a great fit for him because he's not a lot threat. He doesn't jump a lot. He also hasn't really stretched the floor. So in a lot of ways, he's been a negative offensively. But on defense, you could argue that he was Detroit's best overall defender last year. And I would actually not say you can argue it. I think it was actually pretty clear that he was Detroit's 100%. Best overall defender. Because not only is he a good rim protector, despite his lack of height, he's just very fun. He's strong. He uses his length well. He's got a great
long wingspan.
Yeah. On top of that, he could switch on to smaller players. By the end of the season, we saw him switching on to Harden, on to Luka, onto guards. And you could tell it was almost teams had not yet picked up on that because they would often try to isolate him on the perimeter. And then you would notice that guards would kind of have like a, oh crap, like he can stay in front of me moment. And sometimes like,
well, good luck trying to get around him. That man's a mountain.
Yeah. So, defensively, there's a lot of matchups he can't handle. And at 6'8", being able to move his feet as well and anticipate rotations, he really, I think we'll see eventually that he's basically the perfect playoff big man because you're going to struggle to play him off of the floor. So that's why we saw him taking threes at Summer League, and they let him take threes at the end of last season, and he hit like 11 for 17 in like the last 8 games or something, kind of the same toward the end of his rookie season, though the percentage wasn't as high because I think the front office and coaching staff early on decided that if he's not going to be a lob threat, he needs to be able to stretch the floor because he's 6'8", and you probably want your 6'8" players to be able to shoot the ball anyway, or even if he's 7 feet tall, it's just better to be able to shoot, and that's been a part of his player development plan. So he's a good player. Defensively, he's great. I think his value has been seen there, but offensively, I think the long-term plan on some level has always been eventually we want him to play next to a more traditional center. And if he's not going to be able to post up consistently or be that lob guy, he's got to be able to shoot. And I do believe in the jump shot. I think mechanically it's improved a lot. Just more so at this point, just get the volume up till he gets comfortable with it because he is very instinctual. And even when he had wide open threes after last season, we saw him kind of second guess himself and not take those shots. So it's just getting over that hump. That's why he played, I guess, the Kevin Love role in Summer League because they told him to go out there and shoot. Like you're a third-year guy. The only reason why you're here is to play power forward, and that was the goal going in. So I think next season we'll see it a lot more.
Bryce, you buying the dip with the jumper?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not like sold on it, but I have a hard time doubting Isaiah Stewart and his work ethic and who he is by all reports. Like he's just tireless worker. So we've seen enough to be like, okay, it's there. The foundation is there. I think what Omari brought up was a good point. It's hard to know what a guy's mentality is going to be, though, right, Nathan? Their confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Is he going to be comfortable shooting 4 3-pointers a game? What if he misses 12 out of 13 in a 3-game stretch? Is he going to continue to shoot them in that next game? So those are the things we don't know right now about Isaiah Stewart and the jump shot, but mechanically it's gotten better. I think it would have been better last offseason, but he rolled his ankle playing with the Team USA, not the, what was it? The kind of the practice team with Team USA,
Mm-hmm.
and, was injured throughout the offseason. So that slowed down the progression, but he's had a full off season. So I buy the form and how it looks.
Bryce is going to get the draft sicko question from me right now because they took another player in the second round, probably the best draft and stash outcome, in my opinion, as well as the opinion of anybody else in No Ceilings. We were all incredibly high on Gabriel Procida. You guys were able to pick him. He's going to be a stash pick. Bryce, come on. You got to be excited about Mr. Procida one day coming over to the States and playing for your Pistons.
Okay, so I'm glad we brought up Procida because you is on the outline you sent me, and we haven't talked about him, to be honest, on the Pistons Pulse or any other podcast or on Twitter, because he signed a 3-year contract to go overseas. We didn't get to see him at Summer League. And so all it has been is some of the film we had going into the draft or after the draft. I did break down some film, and I like it. I'm excited, Nathan, about the kid. He can shoot it. He's athletic. He's one of those sneaky athletes, all of a sudden it shows up. When's the last time a draft and stash panned out? And so that's what makes me nervous. Now, I will say this, and I only know this because Omari told me. So I'm sorry, Omari, that I'm taking these,
You taking a scoop from him? Come on, man.
Tell him what they wanted to do with the second round pick, Omari.
Yeah, so they shopped the pick for a little bit because I just don't know how high the appetite to add yet another young guy is. I mean, they've got 8 or 9 guys younger than 25, and some decisions to make coming up. Some of those guys as far as extensions and whatnot. So I don't know if the appetite to add another guy for next year's team was super high, especially since you still got the roster crunch now. Like at least one player is going to be cut during camp because they're a little bit over the roster limit. So. Which that's not a knock on the player at all.
No.
I think they went the draft and stash route more so because they could bring him over a little bit later. I think when the roster is older and more experienced rather than now when there's already a lot of young mouths to feed. But with that said, they do think that he could play 100%.
I mean, if the first round is an unpredictable crapshoot in the NBA draft, and I don't even know what to call. There's too many politics, too many things that go into the second round of the NBA draft. So that doesn't surprise me in the slightest. But if you're going to use that capital and you're going to essentially gain the rights to an overseas player, Procida would have been my pick of the guy to definitely take a shot on. And who knows? I agree with the sense of nervousness, Bryce, and how often do those types of things actually work out to an extent. But if you're going to take a shot on one of these guys in the second round, I mean, the 6'8" guy who was sneakily like one of the better athletes in this entire draft class, by the way, and in the entire draft class, who can shoot the lights out of the ball. He's incredibly confident, can pull up. That's the type of draft and stash pick that I would want to make if I was in a front office. So I also gave that one a big time thumbs up for the Detroit Pistons. Omari, I have to ask you, Cade Cunningham, we're going into year 2, right? He showed all the promise that he did during his rookie season. Coming into his second year, is the expectation around the building like, okay, like we got the guy. He ended up figuring out a lot during his rookie year. Like we're going to see a massive leap. Like what's the feeling around Cade Cunningham as he goes into his second season?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's worried about him. The main thing about Cade, I mean, he came in with the talent and the resume, obviously, just being one of the top guys in his class since he was, probably a sophomore or junior in high school. But beyond that, I think just the maturity he carries himself with, just the way he's able to communicate and just everything about him. I just don't think anybody's not concerned about what he could bring next season. I think the main thing with him was just his efficiency. The efficiency wasn't quite where you would like the number one pick's efficiency to be. And Pistons had a mess of the season as far as players getting injured, COVID, one thing or another. And he also got up to a slow start because he missed all the camp with an ankle injury. So there was a lot of noise for his efficiency. But I think next season, that's probably one of the main things you want to see is for that 3-point percentage to get up a little bit higher, overall efficiency. And also turnovers. Bryce kind of touched on it earlier, but the way I would describe it is it's kind of funny because he played quarterback when he played football when he was younger, but he kind of stared down his receivers per se. And, some of the passes are just like, come on, that he'll cut those out. He kind of touched on it during summer league as well. But yeah, I mean, I think if you had to rank the worry level for all the players on the roster, he's probably last because I don't think anybody doubts that he's going to come in and do what he needs to do next season.
Oh, I agree as well. I think what he brings to the table from a leadership standpoint, that was excellent for you to hit on, Omari. He's one of the more mature young players we have in the entire NBA. Just having a guy like that as the building block to your franchise, it's so incredibly important to have somebody who understands how to communicate with his teammates, communicate with everybody else around him, continue to work hard, bring the work ethic, set that example for everybody else around him. It's awesome to have a player like that in the locker room. Bryce, I know you're excited for Cade heading into year 2. Any other expectations? Anything else you want to see from him?
No, I said, I mentioned it earlier. I texted you. I want to see his defense get better. I'm interested to see what he brings offensively.
That's what I want to see as well, too, by the way. I want to see the defense take a leap in year 2.
You calmed me down a little bit. You said, Bryce, for a rookie, he was very good defensively. I said, okay, that's fair. I've heard a lot of people oh, he's going to be on an all defensive team someday and he's above average already. And I'm like, I can show you a lot of clips where he's getting backdoor blown by. No, I can show, in fairness, there's clips of him staying in front of Luka and doing all these other things. So by no means am I saying he's a bad defender, and his awareness, I think this is why some of the turnovers that Omari were talking about is so frustrating, because it's like, Cade, you're the highest basketball IQ on the floor. How did you make that mistake offensively? But he's going to be a great player. The intangibles are incredible, Nathan. That's something I didn't know about him going into that draft. And ever since he got drafted, it's just story after story after story. He was the leader and the face of the franchise as a rookie. And no disrespect to Evan Mobley, Jalen Green, Scotty Barnes, or anybody else. No other rookie was tasked with that in their rookie season. I don't care. Omari's laughing.
Bryce, no, I'm laughing because the Pistons fans listening to this pod just stood up and gave you a round of applause.
I don't care about rookie of the year. All I'm saying is nobody else was tasked with what he was in his rookie season as far as being a leader.
And it's one of the most underrated aspects to drafting a young player, in my opinion, is getting someone who is an A++ communicator. I think if there's one thing the scouting community needs to talk about a little bit more with these guys coming in, it's how they're composed on the court, how they handle talking with their teammates, the coaching staff. Are they able to take things away from those communications? Are they able to help their teammates in a way to where nobody's arguing on the court, everybody's on the same page? It's not just talking during the game, it's those things as well. And then obviously communicating with the outside parties as well, communicating with the media, communicating with everybody else around them, because that's such an underrated aspect. I think it shows character. I think it shows maturity. It shows a willingness to step up and be a leader. Very underrated aspect through the entire scouting process. I'll leave it at that. So we're going to close out the podcast quickly on, I know I told Bryce.
I told Omari. I gave Omari a heads up, so he would be prepared.
The Pistons young core ranking. So I would define this as guys under the age of 25, and I would define ranking them based on not just straight pound for pound, who's the best player today, but really who's important to the franchise moving forward. Like who are the guys who are likeliest to be with the team moving past this year and who are likely to make more of a long-term impact. So I'll quickly go through my list, then I'll go to Bryce and I'll have Omari as the reporter finish it out. So I got Cade Cunningham number 1, Jaden Ivey number 2. No surprises there. I do have Saddiq Bey number 3. I think just what this team needs from an offensive standpoint. He may not have the sexiest upside of some of these guys, but I think he's an incredibly important foundational piece, just giving some of these other guys a consistent offensive threat to work with night in, night out. Then I would have Jalen Duren, Isaiah Stewart, Isaiah Livers, Killian Hayes, Marvin Bagley, Hamidou Diallo, and Gabriel Procida on the back end. And by the way, Diallo, if we're arguing just pound for pound better player today, we can move him up a few spots. I don't know what the future is going to look like for him, but those are my rankings. Bryce, what's your list look like?
Yeah, so mine is very similar. Our top 5 were the same 5 guys. I had Cade Ivey. I actually have Duren number 3.
Okay.
And then Stu, and then Bay. And it's nothing against Bay. I kind of went a little bit more with who has to continue to develop a little bit. I think Bay is kind of who he is. I know other people still think he has a higher upside. That's fine. I'm cool with it. I hope he proves me wrong. I'm glad you had Isaiah Livers number 6 because I am super high on Isaiah Livers. And so him being right outside
the shooting.
Yes, and he's a connector offensively. He's a really good defender. He's going to play a lot of minutes, Nathan, for this team, in my opinion. I think he's going to play a lot of minutes. So I love that he was right outside the top 5. I had Hayes 7, Marvin Bagley the third 8, and Diallo 9. So just a few little tweaks, especially in the top 5. But outside of that, you and I are pretty well in lockstep.
Omari, you can answer this question from your personal perspective. You can answer it from like feelings around the organization. You can answer this question however you want. But how would you kind of rank these guys in terms of what you think's going this season and then moving forward?
Sure. So this is my own personal list. And what's interesting is that all of our top 2s are the same. And then our 5 through 9 or 5 through 10s are pretty similar as well. The difference is the 3 through 5. So K number 1, Ivy number 2. I think it goes without saying. Those are the 2 probably highest upside guys being your on-ball creators. And K, of course, number 1 pick. So I need to explain that. I had my 3 through 5 was Isaiah Stewart, Jalen Duren, and then Saddiq Bey. So me and Bryce both had Saddiq Bey number 5. Our rankings of the big men are swapped a little bit. I think that there's a good chance that Jalen Duren will be a better regular season player than Isaiah Stewart, but Isaiah Stewart will be a better playoff player than Jalen Duren because we have to see how well Jalen Duren switches.
Yeah.
So there's a chance that there's a chance that Duren is Robert Williams. And if that's the case, then I think he's very clearly number 3, if not number 2 on this list, depending on how Ivy shakes out. But there's also a chance that, he's a great lob threat, great rim protector, doesn't switch quite as well, and you can't play him off the floor when the playoffs come. And I just don't think Isaiah Stewart's going to have that issue, especially if he could also shoot. So, you could say 3A, 3B. Like, I'm not super glued to Isaiah Stewart being better long-term, but I just think there's a chance that Isaiah Stewart's better in the playoffs than Duren long-term. So, Isaiah Stewart 3, Duren 4. Saddiq Bey 5, just because I think Saddiq Bey's skill set is important, but probably in the grand scheme, a little bit more replaceable. Especially if he kind of tops out as just more of your 3 and D type of guy. And honestly, the 3 is probably going to be a little bit stronger than what he brings on defense long term. He's a little bit of a tweeter defensively. Isaiah Livers 6 for the reasons Bryce mentioned, just everything you want in a 3 and D wing. Killian 7, Bagley 8. Hamidou Diallo 9, and I feel like all of those are pretty self-explanatory based on what we talked about earlier. And then Procida 10, and then none of us mentioned Saban Lee, unfortunately, but it's just the way the roster is constructed now. It's just have to see a role for him long term unless he improves significantly.
If you're gonna bring up Saban Lee, are we gonna talk about? I know we don't have time, Nathan, but we're not gonna talk about Kevin Knox.
No, we're not going to talk about that.
We're not talking about Kevin. I've been burned so bad by Kevin Knox. I was high on him during that draft process, along with some other people on the staff that I worked on. And yeah, I'm burned. I'm sorry. I got nothing left for Kevin Knox. I wish you nothing but the best for this upcoming season with the Pistons. Maybe he can put some things together. I have no idea at this point, but we will remain eternal optimists on the Draft Deeper podcast, right? That's how we will close this out. So guys, thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Draft Deeper. I can't thank you enough. This was everything I could have hoped it would be and more. You guys were awesome. Omari, I'll start with you since this was your first time on Draft Deeper. Where can my audience find you and what is everything you're doing for the Free Press and beyond?
No, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. This was a ton of fun. Certainly hope to do it again as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Omari Sankofa. That's OMARI SANKOFA. You could probably just look at the title of the pod if you want to know how my name is spelled. You could also follow my work at the Detroit Free Press. That's freep.com, FREEP. And of course, subscribe to the Pistons Post with me and my co-host, Bryce Simon. We're on wherever you listen to your podcast. So,
Coach, where's everybody finding you, boss?
Yeah, at Motor City Hoops on Twitter. I got a YouTube channel. I've dove into the 2023 NBA draft class already, started doing some of that stuff. Excited to talk to you about it, Nathan. So go check those out and subscribe at YouTube. And then again, listen to me and my guy, Omari. We had a fun episode that dropped on Tuesday morning, the Pistons Pulse. We dropped every Tuesday, Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen. Nathan had a blast again. We're going to have you over on the Pistons Pulse when we get into some draft talk.
Sir.
And have you join us and return the favor as well.
You know, every time I'm talking Pistons, you guys are coming back on the show, and certainly Bryce, I will make sure you're also in the mix for a 2023 draft episode as well. We'll chop it up about some prospects,
no doubt,
when the time is right. Just not now, just
not
a
now.
little too early.
early.
But thank you as well, everyone out there listening to this episode of the podcast. If you haven't subscribed already, make sure you are wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube. Make sure you're following me on Twitter at Draft Deeper, and make sure you are subscribed to NoCeilingsNBA.com, our Substack. Make sure you are also subscribed and following us over on Twitter at NoCeilingsNBA. Make sure you're tuning into everything we're doing. We're pumping out about 2 to 3 pieces in the offseason. We're all still doing podcasts. Trust me, the 23 draft is right around the corner. We're going to get it rolling probably sometime later October. I'm already starting my prep. I'll be starting some preview episodes of the 23 draft class around mid-September when I have my brand new co-host, Maxwell Baumbach, joining me on Draft Deeper. Stephen Gillespie will be back as well. Don't worry, Stephen will be back with us. He was doing some travel related to work, but all 3 of us will be doing some fun 23 draft previews, so I can't wait for those episodes to start. But until then, thank you all for listening. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.